trying to figure out and trying to understand, but certainly they do imply each other. Through the baby boomer generation, a father was on the scene unless he had died in war, on the job, or from illness. Although he was often away for long periods of the day at a job, he rarely abandoned the household, even when it came to be overseen by the mother in the early part of the 20th century. As a consequence, and it did, by the way, the head of the family subtly shifted from the person of the father to the mother. Nevertheless, they remained in contact and formed a compact of support. Well, as a consequence of easier opportunities for divorce and the promotion of new personnel arrangements in the family mentioned earlier, 2 out of 3 boys are now being parented without a father in their household for the crucial first decade of life. This means a boy will miss the presence of a consistent model for manhood and masculinity. Bereft of the stabilizing presence of a father, many boys now run away or hide from this situation. Many clinicians know, many hide inside themselves. Not the clinicians, the boys. The presence of the father is important for boys, especially given their proneness to excess, which, as you have heard, I take to be a gift and not a liability. But the missing father is of most consequence to a boy when he is learning how to love. That is, to take the initiative for the first time to form a deep relationship with another human being. Now, this is a bit of new thinking on my part, and I'd be interested to hear what you all think about this in response to this. It betrays a little bit of my psychoanalytic background, but it also speaks to something that I think that whole tradition omitted. Again, something here is important for a boy in relation to his father, and as I've said, it is in his learning how to love, that is, to take the initiative to form a deep relationship with another human being. You're wondering about the mother. I'll tell you a second, where I think this important person is too. This, I believe, occurs in relation to the father. This is, I believe, an overlooked developmental milestone in male psychology. A boy learns he's lovable from his mother, but he learns how to love, to take the initiative in the relationship with his father, whom the boy must love and therefore like in order to want to be like him, that is, in order to identify with him. Remember, what a boy returns to his mother in the closeness of their relationship is not love, but gratitude. What happens with his father, however, constitutes his first attempt at loving another human being, one that he initiates. A legacy of Freudianism, the boy's much discussed rivalry with his father, with his dad, I take to be a secondary phenomenon. It's there, but I think it has been much overstated, overemphasized. So, 2 fundamental aspects of a boy's life as a male human being are at stake here: his identification with the male and his capacity to love. Both depend for their optimal development on the presence of the same man during boyhood. This is what a father is for, and what fathering means in the setting of the nuclear family. If a boy's love for his father is returned, the process of identification proceeds more or less smoothly. There will always be snags and uneven turns in the course. If the father's response is perceived as lukewarm, and the father does not love his male offspring in return, there can be no accomplished sonhood. Again, that's a real word, as it turns out. On the other hand, as the recent very, very moving documentary, I hope you all have a chance to get on the equivalent of Netflix here, if you can find it. It's called The Human Experience. I can give you some information about this documentary. This particular documentary, just out in last fall, very moving documentary, shows even if the father's response, who's there, is perceived as lukewarm, and the father does not love his male offspring in return, and even if he's not a very good father and might even be a lousy father and a harsh father, a boy has a better chance of learning how to love another human being than if the father is not there. In other words, sometimes a bad father may be better than no father at all. Well, the consequences of not having a father on the scene are more extensive for a boy than for his sister, I would claim. This follows from other features of development mentioned earlier. But let us not forget that a relationship with the father is also essential for a girl's development, now not for purposes of identification, but as a template for relationships with men later in life. For a girl who's learning how to love another human being, the father serves as a living bridge between parent and male. This is a complex and fascinating topic in itself. Today we'll limit ourselves to considering the situation for boys. So, for a brief critical time when he separates from his mother and individuates, then the boy is psychologically homeless as he tries to understand why his mother no longer encourages him to cling to her. Separation and individuation, these are two well-known terms from psychology of early development, written about chiefly by Margaret Mahler. Separation and individuation are liberating, and they are necessary for his independence as a person. But to a boy having most of the threats of continuity of the early dual unity with his mother cut, this feels like being rejected. The boy temporarily feels at sea and somewhat alone. But this is where the father must be prepared to move toward his son to catch him, existentially and emotionally. The sense of abandonment a boy experiences is inevitable, but in the nuclear family, the father has been there to step into the breach, to be perceived as prepared and willing to claim a mother's boy as a father's son. And when the father is not there, what about that? And this being increasingly the situation, a boy will improvise. Will he turn back to his mother and attempt to resume that symbiotic, quasi-symbiotic relationship with her as he had known as an infant? Well, if he does, he might temporarily feel secure again, and some boys do this, but at the price of having lost most of his newly gained autonomy. In this scenario, he may identify with aspects of his mother's role and perhaps with features of her way of presenting, her habitus, her way of presenting herself as a female. He may consciously and deliberately modify the way he comports himself, the way he moves, the way he acts, as a body, as a person, and the body and the person really can't be separated, to confirm this. Alternatively, he may find compromising his autonomy and independence unacceptable and will look around for someone else to turn to other than his mother. That individual may be another female. In many fractured families, the grandmother often plays such a role. This has been the case in many fatherless African American families in the States and among indigenous people in Australia. As I poignantly learned during my second visit here 2 years ago, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity to tell you about a talk I gave in Newcastle in which we had the participation of 4 homeless boys from a group near Newcastle who came to be part of a panel, and heard one of them, who was an indigenous Australian, speak in response to me, totally upstage me, and talk about the absolutely crucial relationship that he had, the life-saving, psychologically life-saving relationship that he had with his grandmother. In any case, or a boy might instead approach another male. This might be a grandfather, an uncle, an older brother. Often it is one of his mother's transient boyfriends, or it is a man outside of the household, perhaps a male teacher, a coach, or a mentor. Of course, there are now also many choices among virtual fathering figures. Most are found on television. Sports heroes, including the very popular superstars in football, are eagerly chosen. But they are not real to him. And tragically, boys know this, even while hungrily looking to them as models. The surrogate father figure is no longer likely then to be someone with cultural prestige in the community, as he might have been in the past, a minister, priest, a rabbi. If he is to be someone with that sort of status, he's more likely these days to be a school counselor or a psychotherapist. But in that case, he is someone who has been assigned to the boy by his mother, his pediatrician, or a school official, because unusual personality features have already become apparent in the boy. The availability of such a father substitute will be based on a determination then of illness, of psychopathology, right? And not on the basis of something positive. It may be the only option, but I think we need to remember that it carries with it that shadow of there's something wrong with me. That's why I have to see this man to somehow help. What the mother or expert has seen in boys who have grown up without fathers is what James Herzog has termed father hunger. These will be its signs: depression, often disguised as irritability, particularly in adolescence, in the post-pubertal years, but also in younger boys. Uncertain or ambivalent self-identification as a boy. Problems with impulse control and acting out. Generalized lack of engagement in social life. Difficulty in forming new relationships, wariness about intimacy with another person, aversion to being touched, physically and emotionally, an overall sense of fearfulness and consequent absence of initiative, lack of assertiveness, perhaps compensated for by bullying, aggressive behavior, lack of a sense of competence, difficulty cooperating with authority figures and the dozen, and even estrangement from what we used to call the numinous, or a sense of the spiritual, a sense of the divine in the world. While boys are eager to tell us about their experience of father hunger and much more, we all must listen, but understand that boys often require a special kind of listener. So I move toward my conclusions here. They want to tell an older male about their disappointment at not having had a father to love and be loved by in return, someone to emulate and identify with. Here, a male age mate will not do, nor will a woman. Not because she is female, but because she is associated in the young male's mind with his mother, from whom he has had to be liberated in order to move on to individuation. If learning to love is a son-father transaction that in fact defines the males involved as son and father respectively, and if this experience serves as the template for a male's way of loving in general, and this will include his way of loving women